Hello everyone, it's Joe here from Snake Draft FPL, and today I've got 5 player profiles pre-game week 10. Should you look to bring these players in on a trade? Should you hold on to them, or should you sell? We're looking at Marcus Rashford, Joao Pedro, Douglas Luiz, Anthony Gordon and Dejan Kulusevski. As always, if you enjoy the content, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you are new. Let's have a look at some players. As always, the data is courtesy of Fantasy Football Hub. If you are interested in having a look in a bit more detail, you can sign up using my link in the description. First player we're looking at, Marcus Rashford. So as through all my player profiles, we're going to be looking at the minutes, the underlying data and the fixtures, which I think are the 3 key things you need to look at when evaluating a player. First of all, how much game time are they getting? What are they doing with that game time? And what are the fixtures coming up that they can likely do well in? So looking at the minutes, overall there's no issue with the minutes. You know, he started every game and we would expect that to continue for Marcus Rashford. A premium pick like him, you want to get to as close to 90 minutes per game as possible. There are a couple of concerning games for someone of his valuation. Game week 7, 76 minutes, losing 1-0, comes off. That is worrying. Game week 8, 62 minutes, subbed off while they're losing. Again, worrying. I don't think his position in the team is under threat because there aren't really any options at United that are performing well in his position. So I'm pretty sure the starts are going to continue to come. I just would like to see those numbers, 80 plus minutes, only comes off if the game's done. That's where you want from your first round pick. So yeah, a little bit worrying, but not too bad. When we look at the data, if we look at the heat map, that's exactly what I'd expect from Marcus Rashford. He's been playing off the left since Højlund's come in, which is exactly where we want him to be. Playing on that left wing, you'd think this is a perfect setup for him to do well. He has underperformed massively so far. From his 760 minutes, he's got 30 FPL points. His expected points, which is kind of a data model that Fantasy Football Hub using their expected goals and expected assists, plus the minutes, and they do some trickery to figure out the points they would have got had they returned at the average rate. X points are 40, 10 more than his actual points he scored so far. So he has been on the, I'll say unlucky, but what I mean is he's been on the wrong side of the finishing variance so far. You could call it luck, you could call it form, confidence, whatever. I suspect it mainly is confidence. He looks like he has been quite underconfident. And something Rashford does when he's not confident, which we've seen loads, is that he just shoots from all angles. And while that may sound like that's a good thing, it's not really, because when he's playing at his best, he takes chances in great positions. And when he's not at his best, he takes a lot of shots from poor areas. And that is borne out in the stats. 2.96 shots in the box is pretty high. That is a figure that I would like to see. If Rashford had been doing well, that's around the figure that I would like to see from him. But the expected goals, so here per 90 minutes I've got the non-penalty expected goals, so any expected goal data from the shots he's taken that aren't penalties. 0.33, it's not horrendous, but it's not quite as good as we've seen from him, certainly in the second half of last season. He was more, I think, closer to 0.5, 0.6. So it is low. 0.33 is quite low for him. It's not bad in the grand scheme of things, and I definitely think there are signs that he's not a complete busted flush. There are people that are going to own him that are thinking, I need to just get rid of him ASAP, and I don't think it's quite that bad yet. Chances created 1.3 and expected assists of 0.17 is about what we'd expect from Rashford. He's not a big creator. He's definitely more of a finisher. So do I expect the actual points return to improve? I do expect him to improve on what he's had so far. I don't think we're going to see a consistent decline across the season. As I said, he has underperformed so far, and I think that will probably change. The question is, how much better is he going to get, and is he going to be worth that sort of high valuation that we had at the start of the season? when we look at the fixtures, obviously it's City at home this week, game week 10, which is not a fixture you want to target. And I know there's a lot of people out there that are looking at Rashford in their team at home to City this week thinking, oh, I wish he was someone else. And I completely get that. But what I will say is if you own him, I would definitely not trade him out at the moment unless you can get one of the first round picks. Someone like Saka, Son, Haaland, Salah, Bruno. That's probably it. I don't think there's anyone, maybe Maddison, maybe. But other than that, I don't think I'd trade him for anyone because this is probably I think personally, this is the lowest his value is going to be at any point. And if you can stomach it, I would personally hold him through the City game this week. Then they come up against Fulham away, Luton at home, Everton away. Those 3 fixtures are certainly one to target. And if you've got to think he's going to get at least a return or 2 in those 3 games. So my plan, if I owned him, would be to hold him this week, hold him against Fulham, hold him against Luton. If he's performed in Luton and Fulham, then I would look to get rid of him after that Luton at home game because he's still got that Everton fixture to entice people into buying him. It's much harder to trade someone when they're staring at the next fixture of Newcastle away, Chelsea at home. So I would probably look to trade him out after Luton at home if I was in this situation. Because, as I said, I don't think he's going to hit the heights of some of the other premium players. Now, if he doesn't perform in these games, you've just got to hold him until he starts getting something, I think. Because I wouldn't personally trade him out for the likes of like the 2nd, 3rd, 4th round picks that some people have been throwing about, the likes of Mbermo, Matoma. You can't lose that much value on him, I personally don't think. So I would hold, wait and hope that United improve because most sort of predictions have them still finished in top 6, so they have to improve at some point. So that's what my plan would be personally. Okay, the next player we're looking at is Douglas Luiz. When we look at the minutes, there's definitely no issue there. Started 9 out of 9 games. He was subbed off reasonably early in game week 2, 63 minutes. Subbed off in game week 4 at 71 minutes. The rest 85 plus. He's completed 90 minutes in the last 5 games. He looks fit as a fiddle. He's playing Europe, Premier League, doesn't matter. I think there's no chance he doesn't play. Very, very important player for Villa. Potentially one of the best central midfielders in the league, in my opinion. Really, really good footballer. But how good of a fantasy asset is he? That is the question. And when we look at the data, there is more to it than his 49 points that he's racked up so far. Expected points of 38.6. That obviously does take into account the 2 penalties he scored. Is it 2 penalties or 3? 2, I think. He has got on an insane run of home form. I think he scored 7 goals in the last 6 home games for Villa, stretching back to last season, which is ridiculous. But the data doesn't really suggest this is likely to continue. Now, I wouldn't say it's bad enough that you should drop him. I definitely wouldn't. I kind of tweeted out when we first learned that he was on penalties this season. The penalties are enough for me to think he's now a draft option. And he certainly is an option, but I wouldn't go much further than he's a 5th midfielder and someone I would look to waver in and out based on the fixtures. But there will be people out there, because people are swayed by total points, that would now consider Douglas Luiz in the next tier up, which I certainly wouldn't. So I do think it's a good time to sell. Now, there is a caveat to that, which I'll get onto on the next slide. But when we look at the actual data, X points, he's overperformed by about 10 points. Non-penalty expected goals per 90, which is really the biggest goal threat indicator, 0.09. So from open play, from all situations apart from the penalties, he doesn't have much goal threat. I know he has scored, I think, 2 goals in open play, but the data does not suggest that will continue. Expected assists of 0.11 per 90, again, very low. So it's not like he's a big creator, but he doesn't have much goal threat. He doesn't really have much of either. And, shots in the box, 0.83 per 90. I think that's probably just the penalties and maybe one more. Chances created 1.18. So this data is all low. This is the data of someone that I personally would only consider an option in an absolutely brilliant fixture, which he does have coming up. So the next couple of fixtures, Luton at home, Forest away, Fulham at home. Those 3 fixtures are unbelievable, and it's a very, very difficult thing to trade him away before those 3. So I get, I perfectly understand that no one's going to want to sell him now, but if he doesn't get a penalty in either of those 3 games, what are the chances he returns? It's still very low. If we think overall for the season so far, his expected return rate is about 1 in 5. Now, these are 3 of the best fixtures you can get, so I would bump that up significantly to maybe 1 in 3. Even 1 in 3, 1 return over the next 3 game weeks in 3 of the best fixtures you can get isn't that high. Now, he does have penalties, which does make a difference, but Villa have already had a couple of penalties this season. How many are they likely to get? The average for across the season is only 3 or 4. So I do think if you can persuade someone to give you a great pick and you can use these fixtures to persuade them, I think it's a really, really good trade. I don't think he's a bad option. I certainly wouldn't drop him, but the overperformance we've seen so far just can't continue realistically. So, yeah, not an option for me that I would be looking to bring in, certainly, because I think anyone that owns him is going to value him way too highly, but definitely a potential sell. He's still a good hold. As I said, the next 3 fixtures are amazing. If you can't get anyone to take the bait, then hold him over the next 3. And if he does spike a big return, you can then maybe look to even the next tier above. But the kind of players I would probably be targeting for Douglas Luiz, the likes of Neto, Szoboszlai, Anthony Gordon, these kind of players, if you can persuade someone to give you one of those for Douglas Luiz, I think you're in a pretty good scenario. Next up is Joao Pedro. So this is quite a frustrating one for those of us that drafted him at the start. He's not really done it so far. I have had people up to a couple of weeks ago saying, should I drop him? I don't think you should, especially not now, because the circumstances have changed a little bit. When we look back at the minutes, 4 out of 9 starts, average minutes per appearance. He has appeared in every single game, either started or come off the bench, averaging 53 minutes per game week, which isn't that bad, actually. To be honest, that's workable, I'd say. If he's averaging 55 minutes, the data, as we'll see shortly, is pretty good. So I'd like to see that go up, and I think that will go up in the coming game weeks, mainly because of the injury to Danny Welbeck really does reduce their options through the middle. It's effectively going to work out as Joao Pedro, Evan Ferguson and Fati for 2 of the spots up front and in number 10, and kind of Ferguson can only play that number 10, that striker role, whereas Joao Pedro and Fati can play either. Then we're going to be looking at Matoma on the left and Adingra on the right for the most part, I would say. That's what we saw in the Europa League last night. We saw Joao Pedro start up front with Fati behind him, Matoma on the left, Adingra on the right. I think that's going to be the first choice lineup for the time being. Evan Ferguson will get a decent amount of minutes just because they do have that option to bench one of Fati or Pedro. But it looks to me that Pedro's getting more and more important to the way that Brighton play. He's played in all the toughest fixtures. He started against Liverpool, started against City, started in the Europa League. I think he is first choice, and with the fixtures they've got coming up, I think he's in for a really good spell. When we look at the actual underlying data, the minutes, as we just spoke about, are a bit hit and miss. 26 points from an expected points of 30.5, so he has underperformed a little bit so far. I think if his minutes had been better, we would have seen that X points be really high, because when we look at his per 90 data, non-penalty expected goals of 0.32 and expected assists of 0.26. That's pretty good. Plus he is the first choice penalty taker, so if you add on pens on top of that, we're looking at a really strong asset. 2.62 shots in the box per 90, 2.25 chances created, both good numbers. When we look at the heat map, it's all loads of touches in the box, in and around that kind of left half space, exactly where we want to see him. I think he's a really good pick for the fixtures coming up, as long as he gets the minutes. It seems to me, at the start of the season, De Zerbi mentioned that Joao Pedro wasn't quite playing in the way that he wanted him to. He said he's definitely got the quality, but he hasn't quite suited to our style of play yet. But I think that's coming. It looks to me like he is one of the most important players for Brighton at the moment, and I think he's going to start the vast majority. I think he's a really, really good pick. When we look at the fixtures coming up, Fulham at home, Everton away, Sheffield United at home, Forest away, the next 4. What a fantastic time to own him. He may not start all 4 of those. He probably won't start all 4 of those. But if we can average that 55 minutes per game that he's been doing so far this season, with those fixtures, I'd expect a lot of returns. And because of the Danny Welbeck injury, I expect those average minutes to go from 55 to 65, 70. And I would expect 3 starts out of 4 probably in this run. And if that's the case, I think then he's a fantastic pick. Brighton are one of the best attacks in the league at the moment. They have been all season, even with the tough fixtures they've had since about game week 4. If you can trade him in with a frustrated owner for one of the kind of mid-tier forwards, I think he's a really good choice. One trade I do really like, potentially, is if you own Awoniyi and you're struggling with some injuries and some depth at the moment, I think you could probably persuade some Joao Pedro owners to trade him for an injured Awoniyi, just because the returns have been there for Awoniyi but not for Joao Pedro, and I think that's a really good trade if you can get that done. I'd much prefer to have Joao Pedro in the medium term. I'd potentially even stretch to the likes of Edouard or maybe even Gakpo, to be honest. I think that would... It's a tough one because Gakpo obviously has potential as well, but the way things are looking, I think I'd rather have Joao Pedro going forward. If I own Joao Pedro, I wouldn't do that swap to Gakpo, so that makes me think that that is something you should probably target. Next up, we're looking at Anthony Gordon. Let's take a look at the minutes. So he started 7 out of the 8 games he was available for. I've not included the West Ham game because he was suspended in game week 8. So he started 7 out of 8. Average minutes per appearance is 76 minutes, so really high. The only game he didn't start was Sheffield United away, the 8-0, and he did play 78 minutes in that game because Harvey Barnes got that injury. Since that injury to Harvey Barnes, I do think that Gordon is pretty much nailed on. He looks really important to the way Newcastle are playing at the moment, and I think he's a really, really strong option. I don't really have any concern over his minutes. Okay, maybe he'll get rested in 1 or 2 games over the course of the first half of the season while they've still got Champions League, but that would involve playing, I guess, Almiron on the right and Jacob Murphy on the left, which I do think is quite a significant downgrade. So I just don't really see it happening that often. When we look at the data, points 45 from an expected points of 30.7, so he has overperformed a decent amount, but mainly that's been on assists and not on goals. One thing he does do is win quite a lot of penalties because he does go down quite easily. He's certainly won at least 1 already this season. It might be 2. So that obviously doesn't come into his expected assist figure, which is only 0.18 per 90, which is quite low. He's not much of a creator. He's more in that Marcus Rashford role where he's trying to get on the end of things and taking quite a lot of shots. Non-penalty XG per 90 of 0.35 is perfectly good for someone in his valuation. It's pretty much the same as Marcus Rashford's, if I remember correctly. He does also look full of confidence, which is something that Rashford doesn't at the moment. He looks like he is going to get a return every single game at the moment. And as you can tell from the way I'm speaking, I think he's a really, really strong option and someone that's probably a little bit under the radar at the moment. I think he is probably a tier higher than most people are valuing him. The fact that Newcastle are such a good team leads me to believe that he could quite easily break into that kind of Matoma, Mbeumo, Bowen sort of realm this season, and I have no doubt that he'll get close to the points tally of those players based on what we've seen so far. When we look at the fixtures coming up, it's a bit of a mixed bag really. All the away games are pretty good and all the home games are quite tough. which isn't ideal from a clean sheet point of view, but for a goals point of view, I actually don't mind it, because it means that in every game you expect Newcastle. I always expect Newcastle to score at St James's Park. That seems like it's a given, and often they score multiple goals. And in the easier fixtures, even when they're away from home, we expect them to get points and goals. Wolves away, I'd expect them to get goals. Arsenal at home is probably the toughest fixture in this run, but I'd still expect them to score. Bournemouth away is a great fixture. Chelsea at home, I think they can definitely score in that. United at home is probably quite a good fixture at the moment. Everton away is not bad. Tottenham away is a little bit tougher, but they're not great defensively. And then Fulham at home is when their run starts to get really good again from game week 17. So I do think the fixtures are quite good from an attacking point of view, more so than for the defenders. So I do really like Gordon in this run, and I'd be looking to bring him in. I own him in a couple of leagues, but I'd like to get him in more. So, if you're in one of my leagues and you own him, hit me up. But I do think if you can get him in for one of... I mentioned Douglas Luiz earlier. I think if you can get him in for Douglas Luiz, it's an absolute bargain. A couple other players I'd look to, maybe James Ward-Prowse would be a really good trade for Gordon, or Jack Grealish, or Doku. I'd look to these kind of tier of players. I think Gordon is better than all of those. So they're the kind of players I'd look to trade Gordon in for. And I think it's pretty realistic, because there are people, especially after the suspension, they were thinking maybe they should potentially drop him, but that's definitely not the case. Really strong pick going forward. Okay, the last player today is Kulusevski. I don't really need to spend much time on the minutes. He is the most consistent player in terms of minutes that we have featured so far. Started every game this season. The least amount he's played is 85 minutes, and I think they were 5-1 up at that point when he went off. 90 minutes in 7 out of 9. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that he is the starter on that right-hand side for the time being. Even when Brennan Johnson's fit, I don't think it's competition for Kulusevski. I think Brennan is much more likely to play on the left, especially with Solomon out injured. There's no competition for him at all. They don't have Europe. He's going to play every minute pretty much. When we look at the data, it is a bit of a mixed bag. So his expected points are 33. He's currently on 34. He's played every minute pretty much, as we spoke about. The per 90 data is quite low, but he does get 90 every week, which is a bit of a bonus. Non-penalty XG of 0.13 per 90, so that's like a goal every 8 games. And expected assists is 0.21, so that's like 1 in 5. So we're looking at like 1 in 3 games where he'd be expected to get a return, which is quite low. And to be honest, the data was lower than I expected, considering how much he's played and how much of an attacking team Spurs are. But when you look at the heat map, I think it does explain it a little bit. Postecoglou likes his wingers to play as wide as possible, because the fullbacks come and make interior runs, and it's up to Kulusevski and at the moment Richarlison to hold the width. That does mean that his touches in the box are really wide. He can't get that many shots off because he's not coming inside into the main goal scoring areas with the width of the 6-yard box. So the only time he really gets on the end of chances is when the play goes up the left-hand side and then he can come in at the back post. But that doesn't happen that much with Richarlison in the team, because the play flows down the right-hand side significantly more for Spurs than the left. So it's one of those awkward sort of players that you don't really know what to do with, because, as I said, he's playing 90 minutes every week for a really attacking side, but he's just not really getting as many points as you'd expect. Someone I'd actually compare him to really closely is Bernardo Silva for City. I think they're very similar in the way that they're getting plenty of minutes for a really strong side, but they just don't ever really seem to be that close to getting returns. So I don't think he's not a drop, but I don't think he's a brilliant pick either. He's kind of in that grey area, awkward player that I don't really like to own, because you never really know you feel like you can't bench him ever. You feel like you have to play him every week. You can't drop him, but also you don't expect that much from him. And it's just someone I really don't like to own. No offense to Kulusevski and no offense to Bernardo Silva, because I feel exactly the same way about him. But what I would like to do with someone like Kulusevski is offer him out in combination with another player in the hopes that you can get like a 2-for-1 upgrade and then use his spot as a waiver slot, because I do think you could get picks from the waivers that when they have good fixtures can match him quite easily, because as I said, it's really difficult to predict when he's going to get returns because the data is quite low and his involvement in those shot actions are quite low despite how much time he plays. When we look at the fixtures coming up, they're kind of mixed, to be honest. Like they're not bad. They're certainly not bad, but they're not amazing. Palace away tonight is quite a tough one. I think that, I mean, famous last words because it is in like 5 hours, but I think that will probably be quite low scoring. Chelsea at home is quite tough. Chelsea are a good defence. Wolves away is not bad, but it is away. Villa at home's tricky. City away tricky. West Ham at home's a good fixture. Newcastle at home's tough. Forest away is pretty good. So there's no like amazing banker fixtures like they've recently had, but there's also like enough decent ones in there to like keep you on him. And I think it's probably just a bit of a trap. And it is someone that I would look to trade out, I think, Kulusevski. As I said earlier, is someone else that I'd look to bring Gordon in for. I think if you can get Gordon or Neto for Kulusevski, you're doing well. There was someone in the Discord asking if they should take Kulusevski for Morgan Gibbs-White. Morgan Gibbs-White is a hard buy at the moment because of his consistent blanks, but the data is significantly better than Kulusevski's. So if you're looking from a purely analytical point of view, Morgan Gibbs-White at the moment is a better pick. So I probably would end up doing that if I owned him, because I would rather Morgan Gibbs-White, you feel like you can play him in the good fixtures and bench him in the hard fixtures, whereas Kulusevski for Spurs, you never really know, even in the hard fixtures, they're a good side, they could go and win, so you never really want to bench him. I think he's just a really hard player to manage and someone that I would personally rather avoid. Okay, thank you all for watching. I've just done a load of waffle today, which I quite enjoy doing every so often on these player picks. I'm going to try and get maybe one of these out every few weeks. They do take a little bit longer to prepare for, but I quite enjoy doing them. So thank you all for watching. Like the channel, like the video if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Join the Patreon if you think it would be useful, and we will see you next time.